A little puppy keeps following a police dog for help. But when the dog realizes why, he bursts into tears. At first, it seems like a lost pup just tagging along. But the way he limps, the way he watches, the way he where to find the officer, it's not normal. This isn't just a cry for help. It's a message. One that rips open a past the police dog thought was buried forever. And as danger creeps closer, what this little puppy carries could destroy everything, or save what's left. Why did this puppy really come to find him? And what heartbreaking truth will he uncover when it's too late to turn back? Your presence here is powerful. In a world full of noise, it's the quiet gestures of compassion that truly stand out. If your heart still makes room for kindness, you're already one of us. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the city streets as Coda limped his way through his morning patrol. His graying muzzle and battle-scarred body told the story of countless missions. But today marked the end of an era. The German Shepherd's final drug bust had left him with a noticeable limp, a reminder that his time on the force was drawing to a close. Officer Reed Malloy walked beside him, his footsteps matching Coda's slower pace. "Good work today, old friend," Reed said softly, reaching down to pat Coda's head. The gesture was gentle, understanding of the fresh bruises hidden beneath the dog's thick fur. Coda's ears perked up at a small sound behind them. He turned his head slightly, catching sight of a scruffy ball of fur ducking behind a trash can. The puppy was small, probably no more than a few months old, with an obvious limp of its own. Coda huffed and turned away, focusing on his patrol route. 2 blocks later, the scratching of tiny paws on concrete caught his attention again. The same puppy had followed them, trying its best to stay hidden behind parked cars and street signs. Coda let out a low growl, more of annoyance than threat. "What's wrong, boy?" Reed asked, following Coda's gaze. He chuckled when he spotted the puppy. "Looks like you've got yourself an admirer." Coda tried to ignore the constant shadow, but the puppy appeared everywhere they went. When they checked the park, it was there, watching from behind a bench. During their stop at the coffee shop where Reed grabbed his morning cup, the pup waited patiently across the street. Even when they took different routes, somehow the little dog found them. The next day brought the same routine, but now the puppy had grown bolder. Instead of hiding, it trotted openly behind them, keeping a respectful distance but clearly determined to follow. Coda's attempts to shake off his tiny stalker proved futile. "That's the same pup from yesterday," Reed observed, watching as the small dog navigated the sidewalk with its pronounced limp. "Poor little guy looks hurt." Coda tried to maintain his professional demeanor, but something about the puppy's persistence stirred memories he'd rather forget. The way it favored its right leg reminded him of his own injury, and its determined spirit, despite obvious pain, touched something deep within him. By the 3rd day, the puppy had become a regular part of their patrol. Reed had started carrying extra water and would occasionally leave some in a paper cup when they stopped. Coda pretended not to notice, but he found himself checking more frequently to ensure the pup was keeping up. "You know," Reed said during their lunch break, "that little guy reminds me of someone." He gave Coda a meaningful look. Same stubborn streak, same dedication to duty, even if nobody asked for it. Coda snorted at the comparison, but he couldn't deny that the puppy's presence had begun to affect his routine. He found himself walking slightly slower, choosing routes with more shade for the pup's benefit, and pausing longer at corners to ensure their small shadow could catch up. The 4th day brought rain, and Coda expected the puppy to finally give up. Instead, the bedraggled little creature appeared right on schedule, shivering but determined. Its fur was plastered to its tiny body, making it look even smaller and more vulnerable. Reed shook his head in amazement. "That's one dedicated fan you've got there, Coda." He pulled out a small towel from his patrol bag, one he usually used to dry Coda after rain, and approached the puppy slowly. The pup allowed Reed to dry it off, though its eyes remained fixed on Coda the entire time. What had started as an annoyance was slowly becoming something else. Coda found himself watching the puppy more carefully, noting how it navigated obstacles with the same careful consideration he used in his own work. Despite its injury, the pup showed remarkable resilience and intelligence. By the end of the week, the puppy had become such a constant presence that its absence would have felt strange. Even other officers on the force had begun to notice, sharing amused glances as the small dog dutifully followed in Coda's paw steps. "You've got to admit," Reed said one evening as they finished their patrol, "there's something special about that little one." He watched as the puppy sat patiently at the corner, waiting for them to move again. "Kinda like having a junior officer in training, wouldn't you say?" Coda made a show of ignoring the comment, but his eyes lingered on the puppy longer than usual. The little dog's unwavering dedication had started to chip away at the walls he'd built around himself after years of difficult service. There was something about its innocent determination that made his own injuries feel less like an ending and more like a new beginning. Each day, the small shadow at his heels reminded Coda of his own early days on the force, the eagerness to serve, the pure desire to make a difference. Though he wouldn't admit it, the puppy's presence had begun to change something in him, stirring feelings he thought he'd left behind long ago. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Coda limped along his usual patrol route. His patience, already worn thin by a week of being followed, finally snapped when he heard the familiar click of small paws behind him. He spun around, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The puppy stood there, swaying slightly on unsteady legs. Its tongue lolled out, dry and cracked, and its eyes had a glazed look that even Coda's hardened demeanor couldn't ignore. The little dog's right side was matted with something darker than rain or mud. "That's enough," Coda barked, his professional mask slipping as concern crept into his voice. "Why are you following me? What do you want?" The puppy tried to take a step forward, but its legs gave out. It collapsed onto the hot sidewalk outside the precinct, its small body trembling with exhaustion. Coda's training kicked in immediately, and he let out 3 sharp barks, their signal for emergency assistance. Reed burst through the precinct doors, coffee cup clattering to the ground as he took in the scene. "What's wrong, boy?" Then he saw the puppy. Oh no. He knelt beside the small form, hands gentle as they checked for signs of life. "He's burning up. We need to get him to the vet now." Without hesitation, Reed scooped up the limp puppy, cradling it against his chest. Coda followed them to the patrol car, his own limp forgotten in the urgency of the moment. The siren wailed as they raced through city streets toward the emergency veterinary clinic. Inside the clinic, everything moved at double speed. Dr. Sarah Chen, their usual vet, quickly took charge. "Get him on fluids immediately," she ordered her staff. "And bring me the portable scanner." Coda paced the waiting room, his nails clicking against the tile floor. Despite his years of training in staying calm during crises, something about this situation had him on edge. The puppy's collapse seemed to have broken through his carefully maintained walls of professional distance. After what felt like hours, Dr. Chen emerged from the examination room. Her expression was puzzled, concerned. Officer Malloy, could you come here for a moment?" "You too, Coda. There's something you need to see." They followed her into the treatment area where the puppy lay connected to various monitors. Its breathing had stabilized, but the mystery was far from over. Dr. Chen pointed to an image on her screen. "We found this when we scanned him for a standard microchip," she explained, zooming in on a small device nestled beneath the puppy's skin. "This isn't your typical identification chip. It's military grade, encrypted with what looks like narcotics task force protocols." Reed leaned in closer, his forehead creasing. That's impossible. Those chips are only used in high-security operations. We haven't authorized their use in months, not since. He trailed off, glancing at Coda. Coda's ears pricked forward. He knew exactly what Reed was thinking about, their last major operation, the one that had gone wrong and left him with his permanent limp, the one where they'd lost track of their bomb-sniffing dog partner. Dr. Chen continued her examination, gently cleaning the wound on the puppy's side. Whatever this little one's been through, he's lucky you found him when you did. The wound isn't deep, but there are signs of prolonged neglect. He's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Reed pulled out his phone, snapping pictures of the chip's readings. I need to get this back to the precinct. Something's not right here. He turned to Coda. Stay with him, partner. Keep watch. Coda didn't need to be told twice. He settled himself near the puppy's bed, his protective instincts now fully engaged. The little dog that had been following him so persistently wasn't just some stray. It was carrying secrets, important ones. As the puppy slept, Coda watched its chest rise and fall. The mysterious chip, the wound, the desperate way it had followed him. It all pointed to something darker, something that stirred memories of operations gone wrong and partners lost in the line of duty. Dr. Chen checked the monitors one last time before patting Coda's head. He's stable now. Whatever brought him to you, Coda, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. Dogs have a way of finding the help they need. Coda remained alert, his eyes fixed on the small patient. The puppy that had seemed like nothing more than an annoying shadow had turned into something much more significant. As he watched over his tiny charge, Coda couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. The encrypted chip pulsed silently beneath the puppy's skin, its secrets still locked away, waiting to be uncovered. Whatever message it carried, whatever danger it represented, had found its way to precisely the right team, a veteran police dog and his trusted handler, both carrying their own scars from battles past. The quiet of the precinct's evidence room was broken only by the soft whir of the computer fan and Coda's steady breathing. The veteran police dog sat beside Officer Reed Malloy's chair, watching as his handler pulled up old case files on the screen. Something about the puppy's scent had been nagging at Coda's mind, stirring memories he'd tried to forget. Reed clicked through several folders before finding what they were looking for. Case number 4729, he murmured, opening the file. The Martinez warehouse raid from 3 years ago. Coda's ears twitched at the mention of that night. Images flashed through his mind. The dark warehouse, the smell of chemicals, and Luna, their bomb detection dog who had been 8 weeks pregnant at the time. The memory made his shoulder ache where the bullet had torn through muscle and bone. On the screen, photographs from the scene appeared one by one. Reed scrolled slowly, letting Coda see each image. Luna was supposed to clear the building of explosives, Reed said softly, his voice heavy with old grief. But something went wrong. The intel was bad. Coda remembered it all too clearly now. They had trusted their informant's word that the warehouse would be empty that night. Instead, they had walked into an ambush. The gunfire had started before Luna could complete her sweep. Coda had tried to reach her, to protect her, but the bullet that hit him had knocked him down. The last thing he remembered seeing was Luna disappearing into the darkness of the warehouse's lower level. After that, there had been only chaos, smoke, and pain. When the dust settled, Luna was gone. The official report listed her as deceased, though no body was ever recovered. Reed opened another file, this one containing Luna's service record. Her photograph showed a beautiful German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a distinctive white patch on her chest. She was one of our best, Reed said. And she was carrying puppies when we lost her. Coda's nose twitched. The scent memory that had been bothering him suddenly crystallized. The injured puppy at the vet clinic. There was something familiar about its scent, something that reminded him of Luna. Not exactly the same, but similar in the way that family members often shared certain scent markers. He let out a low whine, pawing at the desk. Reed looked down at him, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You think there's a connection, don't you? Between Luna and our mystery puppy?" Coda barked once, firmly. The timing would be right. The puppy looked to be about 3 years old, matching when Luna had disappeared. And there was that encrypted chip, using the same protocols their unit had used back then. Reed leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. If that puppy is Luna's, if she survived long enough to have her litter... He didn't finish the thought, but Coda knew what he was thinking. It meant that someone had kept Luna alive, at least for a while. Someone who had access to military-grade security chips. The implications were staggering. Coda felt his heart rate increase as more memories surfaced. The distinctive smell of chemicals in the warehouse. The strange behavior of their informant in the days leading up to the raid. And now this puppy with its encrypted chip showing up at their precinct. Reed pulled up one more file. The list of suspects never apprehended from the failed raid. "We never did figure out who tipped them off about our operation," he said quietly. "Never found out what happened to all those explosives Luna was supposed to find, either." Coda pressed his nose against Reed's hand, offering comfort, even as his own mind raced. The puppy hadn't just randomly followed him. It had sought him out specifically, perhaps guided by some inherited memory of his scent from its mother. Luna had trusted him, had worked beside him for years before that final mission. Now her puppy had found its way to him, carrying encrypted information in its skin and bearing wounds that spoke of escape and desperation. Whatever secrets that chip held, whatever darkness it might reveal about Luna's fate, Coda knew he had to see this through. He owed her that much. Reed seemed to read his thoughts. "We'll figure this out, boy," he said, scratching behind Coda's ears. "For Luna and for her pup. Whatever happened 3 years ago, maybe now we can finally make it right." Coda leaned into Reed's touch, his usual stoic demeanor softened by the weight of memory and revelation. The failed raid had left him with more than just physical scars. It had burdened him with the guilt of surviving when Luna hadn't. But now, with her puppy's appearance, there was a chance to uncover the truth about what really happened that night. The old case files glowed on the screen before them, each photograph and report piece of a puzzle they had never fully solved. But now they had a new lead, brought to them by a wounded puppy carrying his mother's scent and secrets encoded in silicon beneath his skin. Reed's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up records from their database. His eyes narrowed as he studied a photograph on the screen. "Dax Petrov," he said, turning the monitor so Coda could see. "Former Special Forces dog handler. Now he runs a high-end breeding facility outside the city." Coda studied the image, taking in the man's sharp features and cold blue eyes. Even in the professional headshot, there was something predatory about Petrov's smile that made Coda's fur stand on end. The man wore an expensive suit and stood in front of a wall of breeding awards and certificates. "His credentials look perfect on paper," Reed continued, scrolling through the file. "But narcotics has had their eye on him for years. They suspect he's using his legitimate business as a cover for training dogs to smuggle drugs. The evidence never sticks, though. He's too careful." Coda remembered something else from that night 3 years ago. A familiar scent in the warehouse. Expensive cologne mixed with dog treats. He had caught it just before everything went wrong. The same cologne that sometimes drifted from the administration offices when certain community advisors visited the precinct. Reed seemed to follow his train of thought. Petrov was interviewed after the raid as a potential witness. Said he was just there looking at properties for a new training facility. He pulled up the interview transcript. But look at this. He specifically asked about Luna. Wanted to know if we'd recovered her body. A low growl rumbled in Koda's chest. The pieces were falling into place. Petrov's expertise with dogs, his connections to the drug trade, his interest in Luna. If anyone could have kept her alive and hidden long enough to have her puppies, it would have been him. Reed picked up his phone and dialed the captain's extension. Sir, we need to put the precinct on high alert. I think we've identified a connection between our injured puppy and the warehouse raid from 3 years ago. He quickly outlined their suspicions about Petrov. While Reed talked, Koda padded over to the corner where Ruger lay curled up on a blanket. The puppy lifted his head, watching Koda with those intelligent eyes that reminded him so much of Luna. Despite his initial irritation with the pup's persistence, Koda had to admit he'd grown fond of the little guy's determination. Ruger scooted closer, pressing against Koda's side. There was trust there, but also an undercurrent of anxiety that Koda recognized from his own experiences with trauma. Whatever this pup had been through before finding them, it hadn't been good. All right, Reed said, hanging up the phone. The captain's putting extra patrols on alert and notifying narcotics. We're keeping Ruger here tonight where it's safe. Tomorrow we'll... A movement outside the window caught Koda's attention. His head snapped up, ears forward. In the parking lot across from the precinct, a dark sedan sat idling, its headlights off. Even through the glass and distance, Koda's keen nose picked up traces of that familiar cologne. Reed followed his gaze and quickly dimmed the office lights. What do you see, boy? Koda watched as a figure emerged from the shadows near the car. Tall, well-dressed, with silver hair catching the streetlight. Petrov. He stood there for several long moments, staring up at the precinct windows. Even from this distance, there was something calculating in his stance, like a predator sizing up its prey. Ruger began trembling against Koda's side. The puppy's eyes were fixed on the window, and a tiny whimper escaped him. Koda shifted position, placing himself between Ruger and the window. The protective gesture came naturally, surprising even himself. Easy, Reed murmured, crouching beside them. He can't get to you in here. But Koda wasn't so sure. He remembered how the warehouse raid had gone wrong. How their supposedly secure operation had been compromised. If Petrov had connections inside the department back then, who was to say he didn't still have them now? The dark sedan pulled away from the curb, melting into the night traffic. But the sense of threat lingered, heavy in the air. Koda knew this was just the beginning. Petrov had shown himself deliberately, wanting them to know he was watching. Waiting. Reed's phone buzzed with a text from the captain, confirming extra security measures were in place. But as Koda settled down beside Ruger, maintaining his protective position, he knew they would need more than just extra patrols. Petrov was smart, patient, and had resources they could only guess at. Most importantly, he had a vested interest in the secrets encoded in Ruger's microchip. Secrets that might finally expose the truth about that night 3 years ago. The precinct hummed with late-night activity around them, but Koda remained alert, his body tense and ready. Beside him, Ruger had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, trusting in Koda's presence to keep him safe. Looking down at the pup, Koda made a silent promise. This time, he wouldn't fail. This time, he would protect Luna's legacy, no matter the cost. The night deepened as silence fell over the precinct. Most officers had gone home, leaving only the skeleton crew of night shift workers. Koda lay alert beside Ruger, his ears twitching at every small sound. The puppy slept fitfully, occasionally whimpering in his dreams. Officer Reed Malloy sat at his desk, reviewing old case files. The soft glow of his computer screen cast shadows across his tired face. "Just a few more hours until morning, buddy," he murmured to Coda. "Then we'll figure out our next move." The first sign of trouble came as a subtle change in the air. Coda's nose caught unfamiliar scents: gun oil, sweat, and that distinct cologne. His muscles tensed as he rose to his feet, a low growl building in his throat. Reed noticed Coda's reaction immediately. "What is it, boy?" Before he could answer, the windows exploded inward in a shower of glass. Smoke grenades rolled across the floor, filling the room with thick, choking clouds. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, bullets punching through walls and furniture. "Down!" Reed shouted, pulling his weapon as he dove for cover. "Coda, protect Ruger!" The puppy was already scrambling to his feet, terrified but alert. Coda pressed against him, hurting him under Reed's desk as chaos erupted around them. Through the smoke, dark figures in tactical gear burst through doorways and broken windows. Shouts and returning gunfire echoed through the precinct as the night shift officers responded to the attack. But the assailants moved with military precision. They knew exactly where to go and who to target. Two men approached Reed's office, weapons raised. Coda's training kicked in. He launched himself at the first attacker, powerful jaws clamping down on the man's weapon arm. The attacker screamed, his gun clattering to the floor. "Get the pup!" the second man shouted, reaching for Ruger. But Reed was faster, tackling him from the side. They crashed into a filing cabinet, trading blows in the smoke-filled space. Ruger darted from his hiding spot, dodging grasping hands as he ran for the door. Coda released his first opponent and sprinted after the puppy, his body serving as a shield. A bullet grazed his shoulder, sending hot pain down his leg. But he didn't slow. "This way!" Reed called out, having temporarily disabled his attacker. He led them toward the back emergency exit, providing covering fire as more of Petrov's men converged on their position. They raced through darkened hallways, the sounds of fighting echoing behind them. Ruger kept pace surprisingly well for his size, driven by pure adrenaline. Another bullet struck the wall beside them, showering them with plaster. Reed reached the emergency door first, shoving it open. "Go!" he ordered, positioning himself to hold off their pursuers. "I'll keep them busy. Get Ruger somewhere safe." Coda hesitated for a split second, not wanting to leave his partner. But a small whimper from Ruger decided him. The puppy needed him now. With a final look at Reed, Coda nudged Ruger through the door and into the night. They ran through back alleys and side streets, putting as much distance between themselves and the precinct as possible. Coda's injured shoulder burned with each step, but he forced himself to keep moving. He could hear vehicles in pursuit, tires squealing on pavement. Ruger was starting to flag, his smaller legs struggling to maintain the pace. Coda gently grabbed the scruff of his neck, half carrying the puppy as they ducked into a narrow passage between buildings. They needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere Petrov's men wouldn't think to look. The sound of approaching footsteps sent them deeper into the shadows. Coda's mind raced, remembering every abandoned building and forgotten space he'd discovered during his years of patrol work. There was an old storage facility 2 blocks away, filled with shipping containers. If they could reach it. Keeping to the darkest parts of the alley, Coda guided Ruger forward. The puppy seemed to understand the need for silence, moving as quietly as his tired legs would allow. They paused at each intersection, Coda's keen nose searching for signs of pursuit. Finally, the storage facility's chain-link fence came into view. There was a gap at the bottom where larger animals had dug under, just big enough for them to squeeze through. Coda went first, then helped Ruger wriggle past the loose wire. Between 2 rows of containers, Coda found what he was looking for, a unit with a rusted door that hadn't been properly sealed. He shouldered it open just enough for them to slip inside. The space smelled of dust and disuse, perfect for hiding. Ruger collapsed in exhaustion as soon as they were safely inside. Koda did a quick check of the puppy's condition. No injuries, just fatigue. His own shoulder wound was painful, but not severe. They would rest here until it was safe to move again. As Ruger pressed against his side, seeking comfort, Koda felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. This brave little pup had trusted him, followed him, and now depended on him completely. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The first rays of dawn crept through the cracks of the storage container, finding Koda and Ruger huddled in their makeshift shelter. Koda's shoulder throbbed, but his military training had taught him to push through pain. They couldn't stay here much longer. Petrov's men would eventually think to search the industrial areas. Ruger stirred beside him, brown eyes alert despite his exhaustion. The puppy had shown remarkable resilience during their escape, but surviving on the streets would require more than just courage. Koda knew he had to teach the pup how to stay alive. First lesson, Koda communicated through subtle body language and quiet woofs, a language that came naturally to dogs. Always check your surroundings before moving. He demonstrated by carefully approaching the container's door, using his nose to sample the air for any human scents. Ruger watched intently, then mimicked Koda's movements. His small nose twitched as he tried to sort through the various smells. Koda noticed how quickly the pup picked up on the technique. There was definitely advanced training in his background. They spent the morning moving through the storage facility, with Koda teaching Ruger the basics of urban survival. The older dog showed him how to use shadows for cover, which surfaces would mask their scent, and how to recognize the sounds of approaching vehicles. Ruger struggled with some concepts but never gave up, his determination evident in every attempt. "Stay low," Koda guided as they practiced moving between containers. "Use your size to your advantage." The puppy was naturally smaller, making it easier for him to slip through tight spaces. But his youth sometimes made him careless, rushing forward without proper caution. Around midday, Koda caught a familiar scent, one that made his hackles rise. Someone was approaching their position, trying to move quietly, but not quite managing to mask their presence. He quickly nudged Ruger into a hiding spot between two containers. A woman appeared at the end of the row, her movements hesitant. She was slender with cropped auburn hair, wearing dark clothes that helped her blend into the shadows. Koda recognized her from surveillance photos, Billy Coe, one of Petrov's handlers. "I know you're here," she called out softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not with them anymore. I want to help." Koda remained silent, positioning himself between the threat and Ruger. He'd seen too many traps in his career to trust easily. Billy slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of dog treats, placing them on the ground. "I've been following you since the precinct. If I wanted to turn you in, I could have done it hours ago." The scent of the treats made Ruger whimper softly, but Koda kept him back with a warning growl. Billy took a step closer, then sat down on the ground, making herself less threatening. "You need to know the truth," she continued, her voice heavy with guilt. "About Ruger, about why he found you." She pulled out a small vial and set it beside the treats. "This contains your scent. Petrov has been using samples like these to condition his dogs, to make them hate you." Koda's mind raced, pieces falling into place. The way Ruger had followed him so persistently. The strange mix of fear and determination in the pup's behavior when they first met. "Ruger was supposed to lead us to you," Billy explained, tears forming in her eyes. "Petrov conditioned him using your scent, telling him you were responsible for what happened to his mother. But something went wrong with the training. Instead of attacking you, he sought you out for protection." The revelation hit Koda like a physical blow. He looked back at Ruger, who was watching the exchange with unusual intensity. Despite everything Petrov had done to turn him into a weapon, the pup had somehow broken through the conditioning, choosing trust over hate. Petrov will never stop hunting you both, Billy warned. He can't risk anyone finding out what he's done. But I know his operation, his weaknesses. Let me help make this right. Coda studied her carefully, reading the sincerity in her posture and scent. His instincts, honed by years of police work, told him she was telling the truth. But trusting her meant risking not just his life, but Ruger's as well. The puppy made the decision for them, slowly emerging from his hiding place. He approached Billy cautiously, but without fear, his tail giving a tentative wag. She remained perfectly still, letting him make the choice to come closer. Coda watched in amazement as Ruger sniffed her hand, then accepted a gentle pat. The pup had already shown remarkable judgment in breaking through his conditioning. Perhaps he saw something in Billy that deserved a chance. Moving carefully to protect his injured shoulder, Coda approached the pair. He would remain vigilant, ready to act at the first sign of betrayal. But for now, they had an ally, and in their desperate situation, they needed all the help they could get. The revelation about Ruger's conditioning left Coda shaken. He watched the young pup interact with Billy, seeing him in an entirely new light. Every moment of their journey together took on fresh meaning. The way Ruger had persistently sought him out, fought against his training, and chosen trust over hatred. Petrov's operation is bigger than ever, Billy explained, her voice low as they huddled in the shadow of the shipping containers. He's planning something massive. A final shipment using at least 12 trained dogs, each one conditioned like Ruger was supposed to be. Coda's ears perked up at this information. His police instincts, dormant since their escape, sparked to life. He thought of all those dogs, trapped and trained for criminal purposes, just like Ruger's mother had been. Ruger pressed against Coda's side, his small frame warm and steady. The pup looked up at him with those intelligent eyes, and Coda saw something there he hadn't noticed before. Not just trust, but determination. "I can help you get inside," Billy continued, pulling out a rough sketch of a warehouse complex. "Petrov's main training facility is here, on the outskirts of the city. He keeps the dogs in underground kennels. Security is tight, but I know all the blind spots." Coda studied the layout, his tactical training kicking in. Years of police work had taught him to analyze entry points, escape routes, and potential threats. But this was different. This wasn't just another mission. This was personal. "The shipment is scheduled for tomorrow night," Billy said, pointing to specific locations on her sketch. "If we can disrupt the operation and alert the authorities, we can bring down his entire network." Ruger whined softly, pawing at the drawing. Despite his young age, he seemed to understand the gravity of what they were discussing. Coda noticed how the pup's usual playfulness had been replaced by an almost adult-like focus. "You don't have to come," Coda communicated through a gentle nudge. "It's dangerous." But Ruger stood his ground, his posture mimicking Coda's alert stance. The message was clear. He wanted to help. Billy watched their interaction with understanding in her eyes. He's stronger than Petrov ever realized. They both are, she thought, seeing how the two dogs had formed a bond that transcended their painful history. Together, they began forming a plan. Billy's inside knowledge was invaluable, detailing guard rotations, security systems, and the layout of the underground kennels. Coda absorbed every detail, his military training merging with his police experience to craft a tactical approach. "The main security system has a weak point here," Billy explained, marking a spot on her diagram. "And the guards change shifts at 11 o'clock at night, leaving a 3-minute window where the southeast corner is unmonitored." Ruger listened intently, his ears twitching at each new piece of information. Though young, his intelligence showed in how he studied their movements as they practiced key parts of the plan. Coda found himself impressed by the pup's quick grasp of complex instructions. As they worked through the details, Coda felt something shift inside him. The weight of his past failures, the guilt over the failed raid that cost Ruger's mother her freedom, began to transform into purposeful energy. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about redemption. "We'll need to move fast," Billy warned, checking her watch. "Petrov's paranoia has been getting worse. He's already doubled the guard rotations since you escaped." Coda nodded, understanding the risks. But looking at Ruger, seeing the trust and courage in those young eyes, he knew this was the right path. The pup had shown him that it was possible to overcome conditioning, to choose a better way. Now it was time to ensure other dogs got the same chance. They spent the next few hours practicing silent movements and coordination. Coda taught Ruger advanced stealth techniques, building on their earlier lessons. The pup's natural agility made him an excellent student, and his small size would be an advantage in the tight spaces they'd need to navigate. As evening approached, their alliance was sealed not with words, but with actions. Billy shared her water and food, treating both dogs with equal respect. Ruger no longer showed any fear of her, and Coda had moved from suspicion to cautious trust. Their plan was set. Tomorrow night, they would strike at the heart of Petrov's operation. No longer were they running, now they were hunting. Coda felt the familiar surge of pre-mission focus, but this time it was different. This time, he wasn't just following orders. He was choosing to fight alongside a brave young pup who had already proven stronger than anyone could have imagined. The full moon cast long shadows across the warehouse district as Coda, Ruger, and Billy approached Petrov's compound. Security lights swept the perimeter in steady patterns, illuminating chain-link fences topped with razor wire. Coda's experienced eyes tracked the guards' movements, counting the seconds between rotations. "Remember," Billy whispered, crouching behind a stack of shipping containers, "we have exactly 3 minutes when the shift changes." She checked her watch, 10:57 at night. Ruger stayed close to Coda, his small body tense but ready. The training sessions over the past day had sharpened his natural abilities, and now he moved with purposeful silence. Coda felt a surge of pride watching the pup apply everything he'd learned. At 11 o'clock sharp, the guards began their shift change. Billy led them to the southeast corner, where a blind spot in the security cameras created their window of opportunity. Ruger slipped through first, his small size perfect for navigating the narrow gap they'd found in the fence. Coda followed, his larger frame barely squeezing through. Inside the compound, the scent of dozens of dogs hit them immediately. Coda could smell fear, anxiety, and the sharp chemical tang of narcotics. Ruger's nose twitched. He knew these smells from his time in captivity. They moved silently between buildings, following Billy's lead toward a service entrance. "The kennels are 2 levels down," she murmured, producing a key card. "Most of the security is electronic, motion sensors and cameras." This was where Ruger's training came into play. Petrov had unknowingly prepared the pup for this moment, teaching him to avoid security systems. Ruger took point, leading them safely through the maze of sensors. His tail would raise slightly when detecting a threat, a signal Coda had taught him during their practice sessions. The service elevator hummed quietly as they descended. When the doors opened, they faced a long corridor lined with kennels. Dogs of various breeds perked up at their arrival, some whimpering, others silent with fear. Coda's heart clenched at the sight. These were the ones Petrov had broken. "The shipment's being prepared in the back room," Billy said, pointing toward a heavy metal door. "But we need to—" A sudden alarm blared through the facility. Red emergency lights began flashing, and the dogs in their kennels started barking frantically. Something had gone wrong. "Move!" Billy hissed, rushing toward the shipping area. "We need to reach that room before—" "Before what, Billy?" A cold voice cut through the chaos. Dax Petrov stepped out from behind a column, flanked by 2 armed guards. His pale blue eyes gleamed in the flashing red lights. "Before you could betray me completely." Koda instinctively moved in front of Ruger, his hackles rising. Petrov's smile grew wider as he studied them. "My best asset," he said, looking at Ruger, "and the dog who ruined everything." His gaze shifted to Koda. "How fitting to find you both here. Though I must admit Billy's involvement was unexpected." The guards raised their weapons. Billy backed away slowly, her hand slipping into her pocket where she'd hidden her phone. Koda saw her fingers moving, knew she was sending their location to Reed and the SWAT team. "You've lost, Petrov," Billy said, her voice stronger than expected. "The authorities know about this place." Petrov's smile didn't waver. "Then I suppose we should expedite our departure." He pulled out a remote control. "But first, let's see if my training stuck." He pressed a button and a high-pitched sound filled the air, a trigger signal. Ruger suddenly stiffened, his eyes going wide. Koda recognized what was happening, the conditioning trying to take hold. "Attack!" Petrov commanded, pointing at Koda. "Kill the one who betrayed your mother." For a moment, Ruger trembled, caught between his conditioning and his trust in Koda. Then his eyes cleared and he growled, not at Koda, but at Petrov. Rage flashed across Petrov's face. "Useless!" He raised his arm and his guards opened fire. Koda reacted instantly, throwing himself over Ruger as bullets sprayed around them. Pain exploded in his shoulder as the shot found its mark, but he didn't let go. Behind them, Billy had ducked behind a steel container, shouting into her phone. The kenneled dogs were in a frenzy now, their barking echoing off the concrete walls. Through the haze of pain, Koda saw Ruger slip from beneath him, darting toward the guards with incredible speed. The pup's training served a new purpose as he weaved between their legs, causing them to stumble and misfire. Petrov cursed, reaching for his own weapon. But before he could aim, the sound of breaking glass and explosions filled the air. Smoke grenades dropped through the skylights, and tactical teams rappelled down on cables. SWAT had arrived. Koda's vision was growing blurry from blood loss, but he saw Ruger dash back to his side, pressing against him protectively. The pup's eyes were filled with concern and determination. No trace remained of Petrov's conditioning. Through the smoke and chaos, Koda watched Petrov being tackled and handcuffed, his empire crumpling around him. The last thing he saw before consciousness faded was Ruger standing guard over him, refusing to leave his side as medical teams rushed in. The emergency veterinary clinic buzzed with urgent activity as medical staff rushed Koda through the sliding doors on a stretcher. Ruger trotted alongside, his small paws moving quickly to keep pace, refusing to let Koda out of his sight. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the German shepherd's graying muzzle as doctors called out vital signs. Officer Reed Malloy and Billy Coe stood in the waiting area, both still dusty from the warehouse raid. Reed's uniform bore traces of smoke and grime, while Billy's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around a paper cup of coffee. "He saved us all," Billy said softly, watching through the observation window as veterinarians worked on Koda. "I never thought I'd see such selflessness." Reed nodded, his tired eyes fixed on his partner. "That's who he's always been. Even at the end of his career, he put everyone else first." Ruger sat perfectly still by the window, his ears perked forward, monitoring every movement in the treatment room. Several staff members tried to coax him away, but he remained steadfast, a tiny guardian refusing to abandon his post. Hours crept by. The sun had set and risen again before the lead veterinarian emerged, looking weary but satisfied. "The surgery was successful," she announced. "The bullet missed any vital organs, but—" She paused, meeting Reed's eyes. The damage to his shoulder, combined with his previous injuries and age, he won't be able to return to active duty. Reed exhaled slowly, having expected this news. As long as he's alive, that's what matters. They were allowed to visit Coda in recovery. The proud German shepherd lay on a padded bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged. His eyes opened as they entered, and his tail gave a weak thump against the mattress. Ruger immediately rushed to the bedside, placing his front paws carefully on the edge to reach Coda's face. The older dog's eyes softened as he looked at the pup who had changed everything. Gone was the suspicious wariness that had marked their first encounters. Instead, there was a deep pride and affection that made Billy's eyes water as she watched them. Over the next few weeks, as Coda's strength gradually returned, news spread through the department about Ruger's remarkable performance during the raid. The police K-9 training division took notice, and soon a formal invitation arrived. They wanted Ruger to begin youth training for the K-9 unit. "It's fitting," Reed said one afternoon, watching Ruger demonstrate the security-evading techniques he'd learned, this time to help officers understand how to prevent such vulnerabilities. "He's turning everything Petrov taught him into something good." Coda, resting on a cushioned bed nearby, observed these sessions with obvious satisfaction. Though his active duty days were over, he had found a new purpose in mentoring Ruger, sharing his years of experience with a pup who soaked up every lesson eagerly. Billy, too, found herself drawn to a new path. The courage she'd witnessed, both in the dogs and in herself, had awakened something. After providing crucial testimony that ensured Petrov's conviction, she approached the police department about joining their civilian animal welfare division. "I want to help prevent what Petrov did," she explained during her interview. "I know these operations from the inside now. I can help identify the signs, save more animals before they're broken." The department welcomed her expertise, and soon Billy was working alongside animal control officers, her knowledge proving invaluable in shutting down illegal breeding operations and identifying potential trafficking situations. As summer turned to fall, Coda settled into retirement with dignity. Reed took him home permanently, setting up a comfortable bed in the sunroom where the aging shepherd could watch over the backyard. Most afternoons, Ruger would visit after his training sessions, sharing stories through barks and playful gestures that made Coda's tail wag with pride. One crisp morning, as golden leaves drifted past the window, Coda watched Ruger demonstrate a complex tracking pattern for his trainers. The pup had grown stronger, his scruffy coat now gleaming with health, his movements confident and purposeful. There was no trace left of the frightened, conditioned animal Petrov had tried to create. Reed sat beside Coda, gently scratching behind his ears. "You did good, old friend," he murmured. "You didn't just complete your final mission. You changed lives." Coda leaned against his partner's leg, feeling deeply content. His career had ended differently than he'd expected. But as he watched Ruger carry forward the best of what he'd learned, he knew his legacy would continue. Not through fear and control as Petrov had intended, but through courage, loyalty, and the unshakable bond between two dogs who had chosen to trust each other when the world gave them every reason not to. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear as Coda settled onto the worn wooden planks of Reed's front porch. His gray muzzle lifted slightly, catching the familiar scents of fallen leaves and morning dew. Though his shoulder still ached on cold days, the pain had become a gentle reminder of battles won rather than a burden. Today was special. Coda could sense it in the way Reed moved about the house with extra energy, in the way the starched uniform shirt crackled as his partner straightened it one final time in front of the mirror. Today was Ruger's day. The sound of tires on gravel announced Billy's arrival. She stepped out of her department vehicle wearing her new Animal Welfare Division uniform, her badge catching the morning light. Behind her bounded Ruger, no longer the scruffy, wounded pup who had once stalked Coda's footsteps, but a proud young dog with a gleaming coat and confident stride. Ruger approached the porch with measured steps, his tail wagging as he greeted his mentor. Coda rose slowly to meet him, touching noses in quiet acknowledgement. The younger dog had grown into his paws, his frame strong and athletic after months of dedicated training. But it was the clarity in his eyes that moved Coda most. All traces of fear and conditioning had been replaced by purpose and compassion. Reed emerged from the house carrying something that made Coda's heart skip. His old service badge, polished to a brilliant shine. The metal caught the sunlight as Reed knelt beside Ruger, who sat perfectly still, understanding the gravity of the moment. "This badge," Reed said softly, "has seen 27 drug busts, 15 rescue operations, and countless lives saved." His fingers traced the worn edges before carefully attaching it to Ruger's new collar. "It carries the weight of service, sacrifice, and honor. Now it's yours to carry forward." Billy wiped a tear from her cheek as she watched. Her own journey from Petrov's unwilling accomplice to dedicated public servant had run parallel to Ruger's transformation. Together, they had found redemption in service to others. Coda observed the ceremony with quiet pride. Each breath felt easier than the last, as though a weight he hadn't known he was carrying finally lifted from his shoulders. This was why the injured pup had found him all those months ago, not for vengeance as Petrov had intended, but for healing, for continuation. As Billy and Ruger prepared to leave for their first official assignment, Ruger turned back one last time. His eyes met Coda's in a look that spoke volumes, of gratitude, of promise, of a torch passed willingly from one generation to the next. Coda watched them drive away, the morning sun warm on his fur. He closed his eyes, not in resignation or regret, but in profound peace. His final mission hadn't just been completed. It had bloomed into something far more beautiful than he could have imagined. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.